Gregorio B. Hunasan II will lead the chamber in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our Father, please help us understand that nation building is a painful, never-ending, but fulfilling task. Guide us to make the world's positive view of our nation consistent with our inclusive efforts to seriously address hunger, homelessness, employment, education, health, and productivity. Allow us to end our internal wars with each other, not only the armed conflict, but also the political, partisan, economic, social, and religious differences that cause injustice, poverty, and deeper forms of violence. Make us come to terms with ourselves that we may restore dignity, freedom and responsibility, discipline, tolerance, and compassion. Help us realize that as good people of this beautiful country, we are responsible for each other and accountable only to you for our children's future. Thy will be done. Amen.
Amen. His Majesty Chorale will lead the chamber in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, after which they'll render a song entitled Sa Iyong Mga Yapak, the Majesty Chorale. The Chamber expresses its heartfelt thanks to the Majesty Chorale for that beautiful rendition of the Philippine National Anthem and the song entitled Sa Iyong Mga Yapak. Marami pong salamat. The Secretary will now call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enriles, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
16 senators are present. The Chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. With the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 16th session, September 3, 2014, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the journal of the previous session, September 3, 2014, is hereby dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to consider on third reading Senate Bill number 2055 under Committee Report number 12. This is the measure on forestry profession, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order. On third reading, proposed Senate Resolution 2055.
With the permission of our colleagues and of the Senate, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2055 under Committee Report number 12. An act regulating the practice of forestry in the Philippines, repealing for the purpose Republic Act numbered 6239, known as the Forestry Profession Law, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, copies of this measure, as approved on second reading, have been distributed to the members of the Senate last September 2, thereby complying with the 3-day rule found under Section 26 of Paragraph 2, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution. I thus move for a roll call vote.
The Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enriles, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
16 affirmative votes, no negative vote, no abstention. Senate Bill number 2055 is hereby approved on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to consider on third reading Senate Bill number 2013 under Committee Report number 11. This is the measure on metallurgical engineering, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
With the permission of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
Secretary will do so.
Senate Bill number 2103, an act regulating the practice of metallurgical engineering in the Philippines, repealing for this purpose Presidential Decree numbered 1536, otherwise known as the Metallurgical Engineering Law of the Philippines, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, copies of this measure, as approved on second reading, have been distributed to the members of the Senate last September 3, thereby complying with the 3-day rule found under Section 26, Paragraph 2, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution. I thus move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enriles, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
16 affirmative votes, no negative vote, no abstention. Senate Bill 2103 is approved on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to consider on third reading
Sorry.
1 minute suspension. Mr.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Open high school.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to consider on third reading Senate Bill number 2277 under Committee Report number 51. This is the measure on the establishment of the open high school system, Mr. President.
Any objection hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
With the permission of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting the whole text of the bill into the record, Mr. President.
Secretary is directed to do so.
Senate Bill number 2277 under Committee Report number 51 entitled An Act Establishing the Open High School System in the Philippines and Appropriating Funds Therefore.
Sir President, copies of this measure, as approved on second reading, have been distributed to the members of the Senate last September 4, 2014, thereby complying with the 3-day rule found under Section 26, Paragraph 2, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution. I thus move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan, Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Smeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trilon.
16 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstentions. Senate Bill 2277 is approved on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may we welcome to the Senate and acknowledge the presence of the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Gregorio Pio Katapang of the Armed Forces. May I ask him to stand to be recognized?
We welcome to the Senate our Chief of Staff, just confirmed by the Commission on Appointment last Wednesday, General Gregorio Katapang.
Sir President, together with him is Major General Oscar T. Lacdao, Brigadier General Vic Castro, Colonel Henry Doyawen, and Colonel Roberto Ancan. May we also welcome them and ask them to rise.
The officers of the armed forces mentioned by the Majority Leader are hereby recognized, and their presence is made of record. Thank you very much.
My apologies, Mr. President. They are also accompanied by Major General Lisander Suerte, Major General Domingo Tutaan, and
Light Colonel.
the Chief of Public Affairs, Colonel Ramon Zagala of the Philippine Army.
Welcome to the Senate. You may take your seats, gentlemen.
Sir President, may we also recognize the guest of Senator J.V. Ejercito, who was a former president of the JCI, the JCR Ortigas, and the TOYM Foundation Executive Director, Larry Cruz, is here with us today.
We recognize the presence of the guest of Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Sir President, also here today are the kababayans of my wife, the barangay chairpersons of Tiwi Albay, headed by ABC President Nerissa Cotara. So may we welcome them to the Senate and wish them Diyos maray na hapon.
The barangay chairman of Tiwi Albay, headed by ABC President Nerissa Cotara. Welcome to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is the hometown of Mayor Land. Sir President, I will move that we proceed with the reference of business, but may I inform the Chamber that the Committee on Rules, in accordance with the rules of the Senate, will also be meeting on the floor on the matter of the suspension of some of our colleagues. Sir President, at this point, I move that we proceed with the reference of
Secretary
business.
will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2385 entitled An Act Granting Discounts on Basic and Education Services to Underprivileged Students in all levels, including those enrolled in technical vocational TechVoc institutions by Senator Sani Angara.
Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Ways and Means.
Senate number 2386, an act declaring October 31 of every year special non-working holiday in the municipality of Porac, province of Pampanga, in commemoration of its founding anniversary to be known as Porac Day by Senator Lapid.
Local government.
Senate number 2387, an act recognizing and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities accompanied by service animals by Senator Lapid.
Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Finance.
Senate number 2388, an act institutionalizing grassroots participatory budgeting in the planning and identification of programs and projects to be funded by the Annual General Appropriations Act by Senator Gingona III.
Finance, Electoral Reforms, People's Participation.
Senate number 2389, act providing for an additional circumstance in determining whether sales act or practice is unfair and unconscionable, amending for the purpose Article 52 of Republic Act number 7394, otherwise known as the Consumer Act of the Philippines, introduced by Senator Maria Lourdes Nances Binay.
Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 883, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to investigate the peace and order situation of the country in view of the increasing crime rate incident. Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 884, directing the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent co-audit report that the DSWD conditional cash transfer program involving 5 billion appears to have been plundered, and requiring DSWD Secretary Corazon Suliman to render a full report on this amount by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development.
PS Resolution number 885, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported arrest of suspects involved in a sextortion syndicate in Bulacan Province that involved minors in their operations. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Information, Mass Media, Justice and Human Rights.
PS Resolution number 886, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on smuggling operations using cargo forwarding services in the light of the report on smuggled watches seized by the Bureau of Customs at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources, Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution number 887, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported increase of kidnapping incidents in the country, particularly in Metro Manila and the provinces of Laguna and Cavite. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 888, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on reported illegal harvest and shipment of 39 sacks of trumpet shells imported without proper and valid authorization from the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Sana? Ito? Environment and Natural Resources, Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution number 889, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported need to curtail the rise of deaths caused by unlicensed firearms. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 890, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the World Health Organization report on the increasing prevalence of tuberculosis in children worldwide. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PS Resolution number 891, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported claim that Filipino corn farmers stand to lose 15 billion pesos from allegedly technically smuggled corn from Argentina and Brazil, which are said to be declared as imports from Vietnam and Thailand by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution number 892, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the claim by environmentalist group Eco Waste Coalition that adhesives for certain brands of artificial fingernails contain hazardous chemicals. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
Communication letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act number 7653, the New Central Bank Act, Circular number 845 dated 15 August 2014, and Memorandum number M 2014-033 dated 18 August 2014.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Additional reference of business. Resolutions, PS Resolution number 893 entitled Resolution directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged failure of the Dangerous Drugs Board to monitor and assess the alternative development projects in order to eradicate the proliferation of marijuana farming. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Order, Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 894 directing the proper committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA audit report that the Livestock Development Council appears to have transferred funds to various non-governmental organizations which were not selected in accordance with existing laws. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Accountability of public officers and investigations.
PS Resolution number 895 directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA audit report that the National Water Resources Board allegedly failed to send demand or collection letters to clients with overdue accounts, which resulted in the non-collection and accumulation of accounts of more than 3 years, amounting to some 464 million pesos. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services and Finance.
PS Resolution number 896 directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the COA audit report that 660 million disbursement acceleration program funds that were given to the Philippine Institute for Development Studies meant to boost the economy remain unspent or unaccounted for. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Finance.
PS Resolution number 897 congratulating and commending the Smart Gilas Pilipinas basketball team for their exhibited gallantry and spirited performance at the 2014 FIBA World Cup in Seville, Spain by Senator Lapid.
Rules.
PS Resolution number 898, resolution on question hour requesting Secretary of Budget and Management Florencio Abad to appear before the Senate on a matter pertaining to his department, specifically to bring with him a list of the total disbursement acceleration program, DAP amounts, distributed to every senator and representative, specifying the projects for which each disbursement was released, and to answer interpellations by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Rules.
Second additional reference of business. PS Resolution number 899 entitled Resolution commending the Filipino peacekeepers in Golan Heights and recognizing their acts of bravery, gallantry, determination, resolve, and quick thinking amidst danger and adversity in the recent standoff against Syrian rebel Senator Trillanes IV.
Rules. With permission of the Chamber, we suspend the session for 1 minute.
Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension?
Suspended for already. Accurate ito, ha? Accurate. Yung...
System yan. So when you zero rate kasi 0% na eh. So parang mababreak yung chain of correct. And that's the next one. Pero ito,
Not all the
it is 0%.
Ito yung ano lang, yung kinukwestiyon nila na fine you, refine you. Isa lang count of you.
It's just clarifying
Yung ruling down.
the ruling came down. Ngayon, baka minil siya. I just put me interpolate kasi tatanungin ko lang yung tax.
Si Allen din.
Sugar content.
Sugar on top, with sugar on top.
Yeah. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 876, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolutions number 877, 881, and 899.
Any objection? The chair hears none. Consideration of the measure is in order.
Sir President, may I request the Secretary to read the title and the text of said measure?
The Secretary will read the title and the text of the measure.
Resolution commending the Filipino peacekeepers stationed at the Golan Heights for their exhibited bravery and resolve amidst adversity and violence by the Syrian rebels.
Sir President, I move that... Sorry.
Whereas the Philippine Senate has on several occasions paid tribute to outstanding Filipinos for bringing pride and honor to the country. Whereas 75 Filipino peacekeepers of the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, UNDOF, assigned on two separate encampments at the Golan Heights in the Syria-Israel border were surrounded by more than 100 Syrian rebels reportedly to divest the soldiers of their weapons, ammunitions, and essential provisions. Whereas, despite being outnumbered and coming under heavy fire, the Filipino soldiers returned fire and stood their ground as they repelled the attack until after they were extricated by reinforcements several hours later. Whereas the Filipino peacekeepers are part of the 1,249 strong monitoring force composed also of soldiers from Fiji, India, Ireland, Nepal, and the Netherlands, tasked to oversee the disengagement accord between Syria and Israel after the war in 1973. Whereas several incidents of violence against the UNDOF monitoring force have been reported, the latest of which is the siege and capture by the Syrian rebels of 44 Fijian soldiers. Whereas the heroic stance and firm resolve of the Filipino soldiers earned them praises and recognition from the international community. Whereas the heroism and dedication to duty displayed by the Filipino peacekeepers while on assignment at the volatile Golan Heights deserve to be commended and emulated. Now therefore be it resolved, as it is hereby resolved, that the Philippine Senate commend the Filipino peacekeepers stationed at the Golan Heights for their exhibited bravery and resolve amidst adversity and violence by the Syrian rebels.
Majority Leader.
Sir President, I move that we recognize Senator Aquino to sponsor the said resolution.
Senator Aquino is recognized to sponsor the said measure.
My apologies, Sir President. The authors of the different resolutions ask that the text of the resolution will be their sponsorship speech, Mr. President.
The text of the resolution
will be adopted as their sponsorship.
will be the sponsorship.
As we have done in the past, Mr.
All
President.
right. Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Marcos is
Yes, I
recognized.
would just like to be included as co-author of that resolution, please.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President, I will.
I have spoken to Senator Trillanes, and he has agreed.
Let the co-authorship of Senator Marcos be reflected.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. President, after the approval, I will move that all senators present be made co-authors, and those who are not here but have manifested that they want to be co-authors. At this point, Mr. President, I move that we approve proposed Senate Resolution number 876, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 877, 881, and 899, subject to style, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, may I request that all senators present be made co-authors of this measure?
All the senators present are hereby made co-authors of the proposed resolution.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session to allow the senators to congratulate the awardees, and may we invite them for a photo opportunity with the Senate President and other senators.
Session is suspended. Session is resumed.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Sir President, the Committee on Rules is ready to make a ruling on the inquiry of the Honorable Senate Minority Leader on the matter of the suspension of the Honorable Estrada, Honorable Enrile, no? Then to be followed by the suspension order of the Sandigan Bayan. If I may be given a few minutes to explain the ruling, Mr. President.
The Chairman of the Committee on Rules, the Majority Leader, is recognized to render the report.
Mr. President, there are two issues. First issue, whether or not the Sandigan Bayan has the authority to order a preventive suspension, the preventive suspension of a member of the Senate. And if the answer is in the affirmative, the next question is the process. Can the Senate President implement the order, or should the Senate President include this in the order of business, and should the Senate as a whole or the Senate plenary vote on the matter? On the first issue, Mr. President, this has already been settled by the Supreme Court, who under our Constitution are vested with the power to interpret the Constitution. In Santiago versus Sandigan Bayan, GR number 128055 or 128055, April 18, 2001, the Supreme Court sustained the authority of the Sandigan Bayan to order the preventive suspension of Senator Santiago because the same has both legal and jurisprudential support. Citing relevant jurisprudence on the matter, the court held that it is not a penalty because it not imposed as a result of a judicial proceeding. In issuing the preventive order, the Sandigan Bayan merely adhered to the clear mandate of the law as well as jurisprudence. Or in other words, Mr. President, in this Supreme Court ruling, they made a distinction between the administrative power of the Senate and its Ethics Committee and its members to discipline its own members, where that disciplinary action is a penalty, and a distinction between the provisions in the anti-graft law or in the plunder law, wherein all public officials will be automatically preventively suspended once their case reaches the Sandigan Bayan for trial. So to the second question, Mr. President, Rule 3, Section 3 of the of the rules of the Senate describe the Senate President as the chief executive of the Senate. And it is but logical and reasonable that the courts would expect the efficient and effective implementation of their order in accordance with the intent of the law. And it being a preventive suspension, the intent is to make sure that the said public official will not be able to use his power to influence the case. If the decision had to pass the plenary, it would there could be many circumstances where the decision or the order will not be implemented. For example, if it is during congressional recess, then we will have to wait, and in the meantime, the senator is not suspended. we have budget hearings during the congressional break. Should that senator who's on preventive suspension continue to be allowed to ask questions, maybe to the very agencies that have filed cases against them or made rulings adverse to them? Another situation is where the plenary will spend so much time debating on the matter that will render the preventive suspension moot. So, Mr. President, I'm constrained, and the Committee on Rules, upon a meeting today, and the majority of the member of rules make the ruling that, number one, the Supreme Court has already ruled on the authority of the Sandigan Bayan to suspend a member of the Senate, and number two, that the actions of the Senate President was not only proper, but it is the most logical way of implementing. No? Having said that, Mr. President, there were reservations in the discussion, and in fact, there's also a dissenting voice. And at this point, I'd like to ask that we recognize the minority leader to explain the points that led him to dissent to this ruling.
The minority leader, Senator Tito Soto, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the floor. I heard the report of the majority leader, and therefore I register my dissent, Mr. President, and I beg your indulgence for me to explain why I do not agree. Pagpasensyaan nyo na rin, Mr. Senate President at saka mga colleagues, but I wish to place this on record and my sentiment on record, so that the scholars of the future or the senators of the future might take a look at it in this perspective, so that if future situations might arise, this will be considered. Pagka medyo nasagasaan ng konti yung mga pananaw ng Senate President, pasensyaan nyo na. Sabi naman merong tayong kasabihan kung sino yung mahal mo, yun ang nasasaktan mo. Mr. President, the 1987 Philippine Constitution explicitly provides that each house of the legislative branch shall have the power to, quote, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3 of all its members, suspend or expel a member. Aside from that, Mr. President, I believe that we should adhere to the existing Senate Resolution number 159, a resolution expressing the sentiment of the Senate that when any judicial order of preventive suspension is served upon the Senate President, such order shall be sent to the archives to be retrieved upon such time as may be determined appropriate by the Senate. The said Senate resolution provided that, well, I quote, principle of separation of powers as its primary basis. Furthermore, it is noteworthy to include Committee Report number 321 in that Senate resolution submitted by the Committee on Ethics and Privileges and Rules regarding the suspension of Senator Miriam Santiago on this issue, because it gave a thorough explanation as to why a member of Congress cannot be subjected to a preventive suspension by the judiciary. This is upon consultation with constitutional experts, law experts, and legal luminaries such as former Supreme Court Chief Justice Enrique Fernando, former Supreme Court Justices Ramon Fernandez and Serafin Cuevas, former 1986 Constitutional Commission Delegate Father Joaquin Bernas, S.J., former University of the Philippines College of Law Dean Froilan Bacungan, former Senator Rene Sagisag, Representative Egmedio Bondoc, Attorney Ruben Fruto of the Philippine Bar Association, then the General Counsel of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Attorney Arthur Lim, and Representative Seferino Paredes' counsel, Attorney Rolando Suarez. Let me cite the committee findings and conclusion. A. The Sandigan Bayan cannot order the Senate to implement the suspension of a senator without violating the principle of separation of powers. B. The Sandigan Bayan resolution per se is not sufficient to warrant the suspension by this chamber of Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago. The following jurisprudence, Mr. President, were cited in the committee report as legal basis for such findings and conclusions. 1. By defining and distributing the powers of government to the executive, legislative, and judicial departments, the 1987 Constitution adopted a basic principle which lies at the foundation of our government. Under the principle of separation of powers, each of the three co-equal and coordinate departments has exclusive cognizance of matters within its jurisdiction and is supreme within its own sphere. Angara versus Electoral Commission 63 Philippines 139. Number 2. Being supreme, each department is distinct and not directly subject to the control of the others. If it be important thus to separate the several departments of government and restrict them to the exercise of their appointed powers, it follows as a logical corollary, equally important, that each department should be kept completely independent of the others. Independent not in the sense that they shall not cooperate to the common end of carrying into effect the purposes of the Constitution, but in the sense that the acts of each shall never be controlled by or subjected directly or indirectly to the coercive influence of either of the other departments. This was quoted in our resolution, and this is found in O'Donoghue versus United States 289 U.S. 516. Third, in Maceda versus Vasquez 221 SCRA 464, the Supreme Court held that no other branch of government may intrude into this power without running afoul of the doctrine of separation of power. Fourth, it is well settled that this disciplinary action taken by Congress against a member is not subject to judicial review or compulsion. Each House of Congress is the sole judge of what constitutes disorderly behavior, inasmuch as the Constitution never intended the courts to assume appellate jurisdiction upon a coordinate branch of government. Osmeña versus Pendatun 109 Philippines 863 and 872. Fifth, speaking through Justice Malcolm, the High Tribunal in Alejandrino cautioned that quote, judgment should not be pronounced which might possibly lead to unseemly conflicts or which might be disregarded with impunity. This court should offer no means by a decision for any possible collision between it as the highest court in the Philippines and the Philippine Senate as a branch of a coordinate department, or between the court and the chief executive or the chief executive and the legislature. End of quote. Observing also that, quote, no court has ever held, and we apprehend no court will ever hold, that it possesses the power to direct the chief executive or the legislature or a branch thereof to take any particular action. The High Court forewarned that, again, quote, if a court should ever be so rash as to thus trench on the domain of either of the other departments, it will be the end of popular government as we know it in democracies. Alejandro versus Quezon 46 Philippines 83 94 to 95. Mr. President, the ruling of the Supreme Court in the case of Senator Defensor Santiago may not be applicable to the case of Senators Enrile, Estrada, and Revilla. The acts of which Senators Enrile, Estrada, and Revilla is charged are relative to their office as senator or member of the legislative. The Congress is, therefore, in a better position to exercise its disciplinary authority, if at all necessary, over them. This is completely different from the Defensor Santiago case, where the acts of which Miriam Defensor Santiago is charged were committed while she was commissioner of the Commission of Immigration and Deportation, a part of the executive branch of government. Thus, the decision of the Supreme Court giving the Sandigan Bayan the authority to suspend Defensor Santiago is not applicable in this case, Mr. President. And more importantly, the application of Section 5 of Republic Act 7080, and accordingly the suspension of Senators Enrile, Estrada, and Revilla will result in the disenfranchisement of millions of Filipinos who voted for them to serve their current term of office. Also, it would be enlightening to know the avowed purpose of the suspension order in the case of Mariano J. Pimentel et al. Versus Sandigan Bayan et al. The Supreme Court held that, quote, "The purpose of the suspension order is to prevent the accused from using his position and the powers and prerogatives of his office to influence potential witnesses or tamper with records which may be vital in the prosecution of the case against him. Accordingly, the preventive nature of the suspension has already been served and may have been rendered irrelevant since the concerned legislators, Senators Enrile, Estrada, and Revilla, are already in detention and no longer have the capacity to influence the proceedings of the cases against them." Mr. President, by the way, may I ask that the other members of the Senate be given copies of this Senate resolution. Senate Resolution under Committee Report 321, Senate Resolution 159. By the way, it was respectfully submitted and approved by the Committee on Rules and the Committee on Ethics on the Senate floor, signed by the Chairman, Committee on Rules, Francisco Tatad, Chairman, Committee on Ethics and Privileges, Marcelo Fernan, former Chief Justice, Committee on Rules, Orlando Mercado, Committee on Rules, Vicente Soto III, Committee on Rules and Member Committee on Ethics, Franklin Rilon, and the other members, Blavier, Herrera, Honasan, Romulo, Siahani, Angara, Rocco, Ople, Neptali Gonzalez, Mr. President. So, lastly, Mr. President, the Senate must take into consideration the actions being taken by our partners, the House of Representatives, in similar cases, in numerous cases. The House of Representatives has asserted its lone power to discipline its members. Let me cite some examples. Representative Severino Paredes Jr., 12 March 1993, information was filed against Representative Paredes for graft and corruption. In his resolution dated June 6, 1997, Sandigan Bayan granted a motion, ordered House Speaker De Venecia to suspend Paredes. House Speaker De Venecia, however, refused to comply. Thus, the Sandigan Bayan issued a resolution requiring him to appear before it to show cause why he should not be held in contempt. Unrelenting, the Speaker filed through counsel a motion for reconsideration invoking the rule on separation of powers and claiming that he can only act as dictated by the House as a body pursuant to House Resolution 116 that they adopted. Second also was Representative Pedro Acharon. Representative Acharon was accused of graft over allegedly unauthorized travel orders that he issued to local officials as mayor of General Santos City in 2006. In a statement in 2012, House Speaker Sani Belmonte said that Congress will not suspend Representative Acharon of South Cotabato because only Congress has the sole power to suspend its members and not the court. This was 2006, Mr. President. Belmonte further added that Congress cannot act over a complaint that did not happen during a member's term in the House. Majority Leader Neptali Gonzalez II said that he could not recall any instance when the House implemented a suspension order against a member, reiterating what is provided for in the Constitution that a member can only be suspended for disorderly behavior upon the vote of 2/3 of the House's total members. Also, Representative Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Mr. President, on the 1st of July 2014, Sandigan Bayan ordered the 90-day suspension of former President GMA as representative of Pampanga in relation to graft charges filed against her over the botched telecommunications contract. In a news article published 20 July 2014, the Majority Leader, Congressman Neftali Gonzalez, was quoted saying that Congress has not immediately acted on the suspension order of the Sandigan Bayan against Arroyo in view of the separation of powers of the in the three branches of government. Gonzalez said the Constitution clearly states the independence of Congress and the process in dealing with erring lawmakers. A member of Congress could only be suspended upon the vote of 3/4 of its members. On the other hand, Congressman Jose Christopher Belmonte said that under the doctrine of separation of powers, only the chamber can suspend any of its members. However, the rules of the House is also silent on how to handle suspension orders against its members, especially when Congress is on recess. There is no mention when the chamber could act on such matters. House Speaker Feliciano Belmonte earlier said that suspension order had no, quote, practical effect, as Arroyo has so long been in detention at the Veterans Memorial Center. In a separate report, House Speaker Belmonte said that he will have the matter studied, but is inclined to let the plenary decide. Mr. President, I would like to recommend, suggest, advise, whichever one you would want to take it, that the rules, the Committee on Rules, further study or review the procedures and how we could handle matters of this of the like, Mr. President. Because I don't think it ends here. Hindi po pwedeng two equal branches of government. The other one is above the other. Paano naman tayo kung tayo merong gustong resolution at hindi naman susundin ng iba?
Yeah.
Yun ang aking punto, Mr. President. And so, I thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank the Majority Leader, the members of the Committee on Rules. And as I said, and for the reasons stated, I register my dissent. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Soto, the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, despite the persuasiveness of some of the arguments of the Minority Leader, and I thank him for the exhaustive discussion we've had informally and during the committee, I'm constrained to stand by the previous ruling, and but given the suggestion of the Senate Minority Leader to continue studying this, and given that it deals with the principles of separation of powers and of checks of balance, there is wisdom for the Committee on Rules to continue looking into the matter and studying. But at this point in time, Mr. President, we stand by the ruling.
Duly noted.
And just for the record, Mr. President, the Senate Resolution 159, which I will be studying and reading, was filed in 1995. Senate Report number 321 was filed in 1997, but the Supreme Court ruling was on April 18, 2001. That is why we made the ruling based on the Supreme Court ruling. But as I said, there are persuasive arguments made by the Minority Leader, and we will be looking into it further, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2282 under Committee Report number 56. This is the Fair Competition Bill, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
Sir President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellations. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Aquino.
Senator Bam Aquino is recognized in the period of interpellation as the principal sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. After a careful review of the interpellation of Senator Angara last August 20, 2014 in plenary, I would like to manifest that some questions have yet to be answered by this representation. And based on the record, Senator Angara posed questions on the issuance of a favorable decision under the notification regime of the FCC. So for the record, the answer to that question is a favorable decision of the FCC is deemed final and is not appealable by a third party who is deemed to have no cause of action in the case. Firms may be restrained from merging not because of an anti-competitive behavior has been committed, but because of the anticipated impact of such merger on the market. Mergers may substantially lessen competition by creating a monopoly or increasing the probability of coordination among firms in the market. If the FCC reckons that a merger may substantially lessen competition, it would prevent or challenge it to preserve competition in the market. Until and unless the merged firms committed anti-competitive behavior, either unilaterally or in concert with other participants in the market, there is no aggrieved third party who could challenge the merger that the FCC perceives innocuous. Further, Senator Angara asked, what if in 2015, and this is, if I may quote Senator Angara, what if in 2015 the Commission allows a merger, but in 2017 they discover that over time the merged entity has grown and it is too large in the sense that it prevents desirable competition in the market? Would they have the power to say, you have to break it up, end quote? So for the record, Mr. President, a merger that has been allowed to proceed, which turned out substantially lessen competition, will be allowed to continue notwithstanding. One should differentiate between substantially lessening and restricting competition. The former may be the effect of the merger, the latter by an anti-competitive act or behavior. If the merged entities do not restrict competition by their action, that is, abuse of dominance or anti-competitive conduct, there is no cause of action against them. If the merger merely lessens competition, the merged entity should not be faulted if the FCC took such a stance. And finally, Mr. President, on the rule on the scope and application of the proposed measure, NFA, PAGCOR, and Duty Free have their own charter that defines what they can and cannot do. So as long as their behavior is in accord with their charter, no anti-competitive violation can be imputed on their action. And my wish, Mr. President, is that this be included in the records as the answers to Senator Angara's questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Aquino. Let the manifestation of Senator Aquino be spread into the record to serve as the interpretation of the sponsor and the legislature in these provisions that of the Fair Competition Act, which is the subject of debate. So for future references, this is the interpretation that the sponsor had made on these provisions. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there are no other member of the Senate who have signified their intent to propound questions or avail of the period of interpellation. I thus move that we close the period of interpellation.
Any objection? The chair hears none. The period of interpellation for Senate Bill 2282 under Committee Report number 56 is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2282 under Committee Report number 56.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, I have received information that in consultation with other members, the sponsor and the other members are asking for more time before we continue discussion on the Chemical Weapons Prohibition Act and the Chemistry Law of 2013. So we will be taking this up tomorrow instead of today. On that note, Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Tuesday, September 9, 2014.
Session is adjourned until Tuesday, September 9, 2014 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.